As protests surge across the country to reopen the economy, the Surgeon General warns it can't happen all at once. I'm Jessie Tenor in Washington, and all of that story coming up.
I'm Raquel Martin in Washington. It could be more trouble ahead for the ethanol industry after being left out of a massive federal aid package to help the agriculture sector. How lawmakers are reacting, I'll have that full story coming up.
Aid money is still coming and relief still on its way for small businesses and for hospitals, but not for local city and state governments. I'm Joe Khalil here in Washington. I'm going to show you why municipalities say that may make them go under and what's being done to help them.
New funding for the now depleted small business loan program is still stalled in Congress. I'm Kelly Meyer reporting from Washington how Democrats and Republicans are still trying to work out a deal.
As some hospitals see a drop in COVID patients, healthcare facilities are losing money without elective surgeries. I'm Basil John reporting in Washington, while lawmakers are split on the issue.
I'm Trevor Shirley in Washington, where lawmakers on both sides of the aisle say it's time to get more money flowing again to small businesses. I've got the story on what they're going to do coming up.
This isn't a light switch. It's more like a sunrise.
U.S. Surgeon General Jerome Adams is urging governors to reopen their states in phases.
That's how we deal with resurgences.
Last week, the Trump administration said states should reopen when they have adequate testing, contact tracing, and healthcare capacity.
To make sure when these blips occur, we can quickly deal with them and they don't turn into large outbreaks.
But more Americans are getting restless and protesting stay-at-home orders.
They've got cabin fever. They want to get back.
Despite the protests and their seeming support from President Trump, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer says her measures are working.
We are seeing the curve start to flatten, and that means we're saving lives.
Once more of the country starts to reopen, the Surgeon General worries about divisions growing between groups of certain risk factors.
We don't want to stigmatize anyone for having the virus, for not having the virus.
Adams says it's still unknown whether antibodies will protect recovered patients for a few months, a few years, or for the rest of their life.
And that, again, is why we can't rely solely on an antibody test or a singular test to say, look, you're safe, you can go back to what you were doing before.
Only a vaccine can provide that kind of confidence. But since one likely won't be available until next year, Adams says the days of social distancing will continue long after states start reopening. In Washington, I'm Jessie Tenor.
The Senate, regretfully, will not be able to pass more funding for Americans' paychecks today.
Democrats and Republicans were unable to reach an agreement Monday to replenish a small business loan program designed to keep employees on the payroll during the coronavirus crisis. The Paycheck Protection Program ran out of its $350 billion in federal funding last week. Republican North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis says Democrats should quit holding up the deal.
I think that we need to fund this program, and then we can have a discussion about other policy priorities.
But North Carolina Democratic Congressman David Price says those other priorities can't wait.
The Democrats have asked for a few things that are equally urgent.
Price says that includes providing more money for hospitals and virus testing, food and nutrition programs, and making sure small businesses that don't have established relationships with banks can get loans. The Trump administration is asking for at least $250 billion more in funding for the small business program and indicated Monday they might need even more.
It's going to be decided by the path of the virus more than anything else.
Kevin Hassett, special advisor to the president, says whether the program will need another injection of cash depends on how quickly businesses are back up and running again.
It's past time to get this done for the country.
McConnell promised the Senate will hold a special session Tuesday to try and pass whatever compromise Republicans and Democrats can reach. Reporting in Washington, I'm Kelly Meyer.
California Representative Gil Cisneros says it won't take much to keep some small businesses afloat.
There's some companies that out there just like $35,000, $50,000 would help them get through this crisis for a while.
He plans to fly back to Washington Tuesday and wants Congress to quickly approve more money for the Paycheck Protection Program, which provides loans and grants to small businesses that keep employees on the payroll.
I think it's important that we focus on the small businesses, that we get money to more of our smaller regional banks.
Wisconsin Representative Mike Gallagher agrees additional money should be focused on truly small Main Street businesses.
I think there should be more clear guidance because those big companies are often in a position to devote more resources to gaming the system.
So far, Democrats have held up the cash infusion for the program, demanding that Congress also approve more money for hospitals and healthcare workers, along with financial support for local and state governments. Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown says Congress needs to fill gaps in the $2 trillion Coronavirus Relief Act.
It's clear there are holes for communities. There are things we need to do for workers to keep them safe. There are things we need to do to scale up testing.
The Senate plans a special session Tuesday with the hopes of having a compromise bill that can pass by unanimous consent. The House could vote on the measure as early as Wednesday. Reporting in Washington, I'm Trevor Shirley.
From small towns to major cities, local governments across the country may soon cut services and lay off staff.
Cities are seeing their tax base decimated by the shutdown of businesses and the reduction in sales tax.
Congressman Harley Ruda says the budget crisis is hitting right when local and state services are needed most.
Unless the federal government wants to have these municipalities go bankrupt across the country, we need to step to the plate now.
But as Congress negotiates its latest relief measure for small businesses and hospitals, funding for municipalities is not on the table.
This is not designed to be a sweeping package that addresses the widespread need. This is about urgently delivering resources.
Representative Katie Porter says Democrats recognize the urgent need to help local governments, but says Republicans favored a more limited package focused only on small business relief.
It doesn't do any good for the House to pass the bill and send it to the Senate only to have Majority Leader Mitch McConnell not act on it.
But Republicans say they aren't opposed to providing funding to cities, counties, and states. They simply don't want it to be part of this relief package.
Some states and local governments need it. I'm the first one to admit that.
President Trump says he spoke with Republican senators about it and suggested they're also on board.
We're going to be saving that for another little bit of a later date.
The president said the issue will likely be the focus of the next negotiation. In Washington, I'm Joe Khalil.
That is a market that has been devastated.
Illinois Democrat Sherry Busto says she's disappointed. USDA's new $19 billion relief program won't include money for biofuel producers. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue says his authority doesn't extend to energy production.
We don't have a fundamental way to help that sector.
He's the Secretary of Agriculture, for God's sake. I just do not accept from Secretary Perdue that is not something he can play in.
But Illinois Republicans Rodney Davis and Darren LaHood accept Perdue's position and say more action is needed to support the biofuel industry.
Our job as members of Congress is not to criticize the administration. Our job is to actually go back, come together, and get things done on their behalf.
A lot of it is going to fall with the Energy Department and in the White House. That's where these decisions are going to be made at, and that's where I've put most of my focus on.
Ethanol makes up about 40% of the corn industry, but with fewer people driving, demand has dried up. Emily Score with Growth Energy warns more harm is on the way.
We're not producing ethanol. We're also not producing our co-products, the high-protein animal feed for livestock, the liquid CO2 that's used in the meat processing. So there's actually an impact for a lot of agriculture.
The EPA is also considering waiving blending requirements for oil companies, which can make things even worse for ethanol producers. In Washington, Raquel Martin.
As some hospitals around the country see fewer coronavirus patients, hospitals and doctors hope to get back into the business of elective procedures.
Performing these elective procedures, including surgeries,
is a big source of revenue for hospitals.
Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey says a majority of hospitals in his state are losing money because they have had, rightly, to focus on the pandemic.
Now that it's clear that we're past the peak, we need to begin to allow these hospitals to resume business.
A move that White House Task Force member Seema Verma supports.
We want to make sure that systems are reopening so that they can stay open, and doing that in a very measured way.
But Pennsylvania Democrat Senator Bob Casey says we should take one step at a time.
We have to spend a lot more federal dollars on personal protective equipment.
Casey is one of a group of lawmakers who say opening for business too soon, especially in hospitals, could unleash the virus again.
The near term, we have to spend dollars very fast and order supplies wherever they are in the world. That's got to be priority number one.
This isn't going to be like a light switch. It's more like a sunrise where it's going to be a gradual process.
Verma says each hospital will have to assess what's right for its community.
And healthcare officials across the country and healthcare systems need to decide what services should be made available.
The Trump administration says its top priority for the country is to make a safe shift back to normalcy. Reporting in Washington, I'm Basil John.
In Jacksonville, the city's mayor reopens the beach and some parks with limited hours and some strict rules. People are allowed to run, walk, and swim, but not to sunbathe. No chairs, towels, or coolers allowed. Despite distancing requirements, many people were initially seen in close proximity to each other after the beach first opened.
There's so many people standing around, everyone's so close together. I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing.
But since Friday, city officials say beach crowds have thinned and people seem to be taking distancing more seriously. In North Carolina, Wrightsville Beach also opened today, again for exercise only. Today, the governor of South Carolina announced the state is not only allowing its beaches to open if local officials want to, but is also making plans to allow retail businesses like clothing, furniture, and sporting goods stores to open if customers are limited to a few at a time.
If you can imagine a race, we want to be able to slingshot around the competition and get back up to full speed as soon as we can.
Despite stay-at-home recommendations still in effect, some governors and mayors tonight are allowing their residents to take those baby steps toward reopening and trusting people to be responsible. Texas opened state parks today, but people have to socially distance, wear masks, and make reservations to go to parks.
I felt like it was a way to feel like we're on the track to being back to normal, to being able to just see that things are going in the right direction.
In addition to opening state parks, Texas Governor Greg Abbott says restrictions for some non-essential surgeries will be loosened on Wednesday. On Friday, retail stores can operate to-go services, but customers still can't go inside. And next Monday, Texas officials will let people know about the next steps of reopening.
They will consider the possibility of opening more venues. Venues like restaurants, movie theaters, and other gathering places that can provide safe distancing practices.
Officials in Georgia also eyeing first steps toward reopening. But health experts have a warning about opening venues even to a slow trickle.
What we don't want to do is recreate the conditions that led to us all having to stay home in the first place and having our healthcare systems be overwhelmed. And so that's why it's so important that we move cautiously and thoughtfully about how and when to reopen.
Some states and cities moving more cautiously. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio says temperature checks in the workplace could play a key role in reopening some places.
The temperature checks are a great way to see if someone might be starting to show symptoms.
President Trump is all but declaring mission accomplished on testing for the coronavirus, even as he's punting the issue to governors across the U.S.
We'll be doing testing at a level. Already we're doing testing at a level nobody's ever done before, but we'll be doing testing at a level that the biggest tester in the world will be very happy. Testing is a local thing, and it's very important. It's great, but it's a local thing.
Both Democratic and Republican governors are pushing back on the president's claim that there is sufficient testing as nonsense.
That's just delusional to be making statements like that. We have been fighting every day for PPE, and we've got some supplies now coming in. we've been fighting for testing. It's not a straightforward test.
One state leader who's fed up, Maryland's GOP Governor Larry Hogan, who along with his wife went out on their own and secured enough equipment from South Korea to perform 500,000 tests.
I want to sincerely thank our Korean partners for assisting us in our fight against this common hidden enemy.
Even one of the president's top medical advisors, Dr. Anthony Fauci, says federal and local governments need to work together.
We need a partnership between the federal government and the local people, including the governors, to help them get to things that they maybe not have any access to. So it really does need to be a partnership.
One reason for the frustration in the states, administration officials had been promising nearly 30 million coronavirus tests would be on the market by now. But only more than 4 million tests have been conducted.
So I'm going to answer your question and then try to persuade you to stop asking about a specific number, okay? So from March 2nd to March 14th, we have put over 10 million laboratory tests into the U.S. commercial market, and we expect that by March 28th to be well over 27 million into the market.
New polling shows a large majority of Americans don't believe the president took the threat seriously enough. Yet the president is actively encouraging pro-Trump protesters to gather in large demonstrations outside state houses across the U.S. to sound off on stay-at-home orders that largely follow the administration's own guidelines.
We want to work up in our state!
Mr. Trump has complained some states have gone too far, even though he's told governors they now call the shots.
I've seen interviews of the people. These are great people. Look, they want to get, they call cabin fever. You've heard the term? They've got cabin fever. They want to get back. They want their life back. Their life was taken away from them. People feel that way. You're allowed to protest. I mean, they feel that way. I watched the protest and they were all 6 feet apart.
But that's not true. At many of the protests, the participants are not social distancing, a concern to Mr. Trump's own top doctors.
So what you do if you jump the gun and go into a situation where you have a big spike, you're going to set yourself back. So as painful as it is to go by the careful guidelines of gradually phasing into a reopening, it's going to backfire. That's the problem.
As states and cities look for a path forward, testing is at the top of their list.
The question is how fast can you increase the volume of tests? Because the more tests, the better. That is the axiom. The more tests, the better. Test nursing homes, test schools, test teachers, test prison facilities, but you need the volume of tests.
The president invoking the Defense Production Act for desperately needed swabs as governors push for more help accessing supplies.
I think until we have a national strategy and that everyone is working together for a good supply chain, we're going to have problems here.
It's not just diagnostic testing that's needed. New York began antibody testing today, but officials stress we don't yet know how effective those antibodies are.
There's an assumption, a reasonable assumption, that when you have an antibody that you are protected against reinfection. But that has not been proven for this particular virus.
Businesses adding new measures to keep workers safe. Amazon using thermal cameras to screen for fevers as the city of Detroit begins testing its essential workers. Early hotspots like New York City starting to see a decline in cases as others hit a surge. The White House task force singling out Boston, Philadelphia, and Chicago.
I think that the worst is yet to come for a lot of people.
Meantime, in South Carolina, the governor giving some retail stores and beaches the green light to reopen. 4 coastal communities, however, will keep existing restrictions in place, noting there is, quote, no evidence from medical professionals that indicates the threat has diminished.
No matter what, we're going to see an increase in transmission when we lift social distancing measures. It's really a question of how prepared are you to handle that resurgence in transmission.
Despite President Trump insisting governors should decide what's best, he continues to encourage protests.
I don't think it's helpful to encourage demonstrations and encourage people to go against the president's own policy. The president's policy says you can't start to reopen under his plan until you have declining numbers for 14 days, which those states and my state do not have.
A reminder that any reopening is not just about the economy, it's also about public health and safety.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still